Warm greetings from the Center for National Security Studies. I am your host, Balasubramanian, Senior Research Officer and Head of the India Strategic Studies Program at CNSS. Today, we are in a conversation with Mr. Lucio Pitlo, a foreign policy and security analyst, President of the Philippines Association for Chinese Studies, and Research Fellow at Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation. He previously worked at the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center and lectured at the Chinese Studies program at Ateneo de Manila University. A warm welcome, Mr. Pitlo, and thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bala Subramanian, and thank you for having me in your program and having this opportunity to, have the conversation with such a distinguished Indian expert on security issues.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to have you with us, sir. Quickly now, let me get into the first question. Today at the South China Sea, it presents a very complex task for the incumbent Trump administration, where China is constructing the world's first permanent deep sea station to extract gas hydrates. A more aggressive China with escalating coercive activities against the littoral countries like Philippines is pursuing its expansionist approach in its periphery. Several incidents have taken place that has included not only blockading, ramming, use of water cannons, and military-grade laser beams and bladed weapons, but also the sinking of boats. How would you look at these developments?
Well, South China Sea certainly is, it remains a major flashpoint, maritime flashpoint, not only in the region but also global. And of course, it affects relations between coastal claimant states in East Asia, including the Philippines. And it's, of course, very obvious China's military capacity is growing. Its spending for defense, its rhetoric is also becoming more incendiary, and political will is there. It's becoming more manifest in terms of the efforts to enforce its claims. Much of it was already invalidated by a 2016 arbitration ruling, which to this day China neglects and does not adhere to. And the combination of China's military capacity, its rhetoric, and its political will is steering turbulence in the South China Sea. And in relation to what you mentioned about the deep sea station, I expect that China's technology capacity is ahead compared to its neighbors in Southeast Asia, among its littoral states in Southeast Asia. So it's likely that China will be ahead in terms of exploring and harnessing deep sea resources in the South China Sea. And it may start with pilot testing these technologies in its exclusive economic zone, in its eastern, off the eastern and southern coast of China, including, of course, the island of Hainan. But of course, if China would begin to explore deep sea resources in the EEZs of its neighboring coastal states in Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, then of course the concern is that countries in Southeast Asia may have very limited capacity to monitor, let alone prevent such efforts. Taking place very deep in their continental shelf. So that is a cause of concern. And recent violent and risky incidents between coastal states in the South China Sea, notably between the Philippines and China, of course, that upset regional stability. And on the part of the Philippines, this resonated well in the last elections. We had leaders who spoke strongly and desire to expand engagement with other major and middle powers to try to improve the country's defenses and at the same time promote its position in regional and global forums.
Mr. Pitlo, in your response, you have raised two important points. One is you have mentioned about the political will which is there in China under the leadership of Xi Jinping. It's a very important point that you also raised about the 2016 arbitration ruling. Now, let me touch upon, the Coast Guard law. What do you think are the implications of the Chinese, the Coast Guard law, which was implemented in 2021, which authorizes the use of force against foreign fishermen in its claimed waters, especially, as China continues to expand its territorial claim lines in the South China Sea?
Well, this municipal law will provide jurisdictional basis for the operations of China Coast Guard in its waters. The problem is that the waters being claimed by China include the exclusive economic zone of its neighboring coastal states, including in the Southeast Asia, including that of the EEZs of the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, as well as Vietnam. And of course, this domestic municipal law of China, the China Coast Guard law, will provide that legal, basis for CCG to enforce its will, to conduct patrols, to challenge the marine economic and security activities of China's neighbors in Southeast Asia. And this would, of course, result to more encounters, and hopefully these encounters would not be violent. But we have seen in the last year some worrying patterns of violence accompanying Chinese efforts to try to enforce their position and to try to disrupt the normal, peaceful economic and security activities of its neighbors in Southeast Asia. So this law alone in itself may not necessarily create that much tension, but this law, coupled with China's growing maritime capacity, especially its CCG, we all know that China is now the world's, they possess the world's biggest navy and biggest coast guard in terms of fleet size. And so this law will provide further basis for them to go out in the further southern and uh, western reaches of the South China Sea. And of course, this would create problems. I mean, eastern portions of the South China Sea. This would present, irritants in relations between China's neighbors and, of course, Beijing.
Can you also give us a first-hand picture and throw some light on, what recently happened at the Sanday Cay, especially after the Balikatan, which the annual joint military drills that happened between US and Philippines? Then China went there as usual. They carried out their illegal activity. They just, posted their flags. Can you just throw some light and give us some first-hand input, sir?
Sure. So, newly emerging features in the South China Sea, like sandbars or cays, particularly those within the territorial seas of coastal states that have positions. For instance, Philippines occupies Pag-asa or T2 Island. It is its largest administered feature in the Spratlys. And so these sand cays, these bars, are within the 12 nautical mile territorial sea of Pag-asa, which is the Philippines' largest outpost in Spratlys. But it also lies within the territorial sea of another feature, this time administered by China, which is Subirif. And so this will mean that contest for control over these features, newly emerging features, will become a new feature in the contest in the South China Sea. And the timing of China's activities in the Sanday Cay suggests that it wants to send a strong message not only to Manila but also to Washington and other partners of the Philippines that this Balikatan exercises, the annual military exercise between Philippines, U.S., and increasingly also involving other partners, does not deter China. And so it was a message sent by China, the timing, and so I think the onus is also on the Philippines and U.S. and other partners to push back against these efforts of China to undermine these exercises, maybe to portray, to project that these exercises would not in any way hinder China's efforts to defend its so-called interests in waters that belong to its neighbors. And so this will only deepen the mistrust and suspicion of China's activities in the South China Sea.
Mr. Pitlo, speaking of South China Sea. What do you think are the strategic implications of China's increasing use of its people armed police force, with the maritime militia, who are many a time disguised as fishermen, alongside the development of nearly 3 dozen military bases on the disputed artificial island? And they have also intensified their propaganda, disinformation, and cognitive warfare operations, targeting elite groups like key politicians, senior officials, and opinion shapers in newspapers to advance their claims in the South China Sea. How do you look at it? What are the strategic implications?
So certainly, gray zone operations in the South China Sea, below the threshold of armed attack, has been employed with I would say, relative success in the past. But of course, in the past 2 years, Philippine efforts are focused into putting a spot, shedding light on the so-called gray zone, and of course, trying to dismantle its deniability. Because the efforts of some state actors, including China, by using fishing or maritime militias, civilian in nature, not China Coast Guard or not PLA Navy, that they are not necessarily tied to the state. So that is the projection. That's the effort. But in the past 2 years, the Philippines made a strong case, is making continue to make that case that these efforts are part of the broader strategy of China to push its claim, its position in the South China Sea using all means, using white ships, using gray ships, and using gray zone actors. In this case, fishing militias that perform functions that are not necessarily fishing. So by putting this on the spot, then the Philippines is trying to put China to notice and tell the region and the world that this kind of activities does not in any way diminish the responsibility of China. And of course, the connection between these gray zone actors and China's long-term agenda in the South China Sea, and it will continue to cast doubt on the sincerity of China, and of course raise questions about the end game of China in the South China Sea.
Uh, can you also tell us about the influence operations that have been taking place by China in Philippines? Can you throw some light on it?
Sure. So there are some concerns about efforts by China to try to influence domestic politics in the Philippines, try to amplify voices that are positive or somehow leaning towards China's position in the South China Sea, and try to repudiate or try to lower down the reach of voices that are critical to China's interests in the South China Sea. And the Philippines, being a democracy, having an open society with the media and social media that is open, and so this presents vulnerabilities and risks for Manila, and that's why in recent years the country is trying to deepen engagement with partners, so-called like-minded partners, to advance its cyber capacity, to be able to repel, to be able to prevent its democratic institutions, its social spaces, its freedom of expression from being exploited by outside forces, to foment dissent and confusion, domestically, and thus weaken its resolve in defending its position. But of course, it also creates some domestic debate on the extent to which government should allow alternative views in handling the issue of the South China Sea without necessarily lumping together, these alternative views from that being fostered or being promoted by external actors. So this is becoming a complex picture in the local domain. And as a democracy, I think the Philippines would be comparing notes with other countries that also experience these kinds of phenomena.
Speaking of actors, how do you think regional powers supported by groupings like Quad, AUKUS, and the US, Japan, Philippines, and US, Japan, South Korea trilateral can effectively counter China's gray zone tactics in the South China Sea? And what do you think are the challenges Philippines face in balancing its US security alliance, including, you have a mutual defense treaty and enhanced defense cooperation agreement with your economic ties to China, particularly amidst all the uncertainties about US commitment under the Trump's administration?
Good questions. I think Philippines among Southeast Asian countries is among the most receptive towards unilaterals, particularly in the security domain. We have seen the Philippines warm up to configurations like Quad and AUKUS, made positive statements arguing that they do not necessarily undermine ASEAN centrality and ASEAN relevance, but instead complement in areas where ASEAN is relatively have some capacity gaps. And at the same time, of course, the Philippines understands that within ASEAN, there is a divergence of views in dealing with the South China Sea, and their relations with China also differs among the 10 member states. And so the Philippines is also trying to diversify its security and economic partners. And this is where unilaterals, especially the security domain, is important. Philippines expressed support for the so-called Squad, was included in the so-called Squad, and at the same time trying to reach out to more partners to improve support for its defense and Coast Guard modernization, and of course get diplomatic support for its position, its attempt to try to resolve differences with neighbors using peaceful approaches like resort to international law, and of course efforts to try to encourage other parties to restrain from the use of force, not to employ force or intimidation to resolve differences. And so this is where the outreach, the deepening relations with the US, but also with Japan. The Philippines signed a reciprocal access agreement with Japan, the first Asian country to do so. It is also expanding its pool of arms and arms suppliers and defense partners, being the first to procure BrahMos missiles developed by India, and also procure air search radars from Japan. And previously, bilateral exercises between Philippines and American military forces are increasingly becoming more, regional and multilateral in nature, inviting more observers and participants from other countries. This year's Balikatan, for the first time, had Japan as a full-fledged participant. So it became a trilateral. And then there are more observers, including from ASEAN countries, but also from other partners beyond, invited to take part in these exercises. And in the regional forums, Philippines continue to argue its case, present that it's trying to manage these differences peacefully, and at the same time recognize that this is becoming a more complex environment. Of course, US under Trump 2.0, there's some concern about the endurance of mutual security commitments, and that is why the Philippines is trying to expand its pool of partners, not wanting to put all its eggs in one basket, but instead try to do more, contribute more to security burden sharing in the region. So on the one hand, it's increasing its own defense capacity by allocating more resources for its Coast Guard and defense modernization. That's one part of the equation. The second part is expanding its diplomatic and security horizons. Recently the Philippines signed a visiting forces agreement with New Zealand. Similar negotiations are underway with France and South Korea. The interest to expand its security partners is certainly there. India will be one major and country that the Philippines will be looking out to, in terms of security engagement going forward.
That's a very interesting point you have mentioned, expanding defense and security horizons. On these lines, what challenges do you foresee for the Philippines under President Ferdinand Marcos? The bamboo diplomacy approach, as you know, ASEAN is very reluctant to adopt a unified stance on South China Sea due to differing member interest, which limits Manila's ability to leverage regional support. While on one hand, you have geopolitical risk that is exacerbating food and energy security challenges with higher prices from global supply chain disruption, which is actually impacting Manila's urban population.
Agree. So next year, the Philippines will be the rotating chair of ASEAN, and that is a very important timeline because that also coincides with the initial target to conclude the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea by 2026, the same year. And so that is why President Marcos is doing outreach with its neighboring ASEAN partners to state its position, hopefully get a baseline consensus, particularly among the coastal claimant states of South China Sea. And on the basis of this consensus, share it with the rest of the ASEAN 10, and then have the ASEAN to come up with a strong, cohesive position from which to deal, negotiate with China to finally conclude this document. But again, the COC in itself may not necessarily be the panacea. It may not necessarily end conflict or may not necessarily put an end to the contest for South China Sea, but at least the effort is to have a roadmap or have a code of conduct by which to whether white or gray ships would have to comply with this when they are out at sea. And by so doing, we would be able to prevent dangerous, violent, risky incidents from taking place that would, of course, upset bilateral relations among involved parties. And of course, we also recognize that the COC in itself may not be the end goal. It may in fact be the beginning of a new chapter in relations between coastal states of the South China Sea. And so while we invest resources to try to negotiate for a speedy conclusion of the COC, I think it's also important for the Philippines to strengthen interim measures. So the bilateral consultative mechanism meeting between Philippines and China. Other claimant states also have similar platforms. Indonesia and China, China and Vietnam, Malaysia and China. So all of this will have to be strengthened and reinforced. And the COC will be the overall layer because that's the only regional track available in terms of managing the issue of the South China Sea between ASEAN and China. And so the COC is important, true, but the bilateral and other unilateral tracks are also important. That is why the Philippines, recognizing that China remains the country's largest trade partner, but some security people back home continue to see China as a long-term security challenge for the Philippines, especially on the country's western seaboard. On the other hand, you have U.S. as a major partner, major security ally, but of course, a lot of concerns about the commitment issue, given the seemingly transactional approach, less principles-based approach of the current Donald Trump administration. And so this is why the Philippines will have to balance, putting security issue on the agenda next year, high in the list of the agenda as it chairs the ASEAN meeting, given, of course, the escalating tariff war and the other pressing issues that you had mentioned that are also very important for the region. And so it would have to sit down with its ASEAN partners, neighbors, to ensure that its hosting next year of ASEAN will be smooth. So putting the South China Sea high on the agenda may be very important, maybe a high priority for the Philippines, but for its other ASEAN neighbors, maybe they will put more premium on economic issues, supply chains, how to insulate the economy from the tariff war escalating between US and China. And so the Philippines will have to find ways, to work with its ASEAN neighbors to identify, shortlist key agendas that will be tackled.
Speaking of other pressing issues, let me little bit take you to this offshore gaming operators. How does Philippine offshore gaming operators, popularly in the media, it's called as POGOs, impact Manila's geopolitical and security challenges? Because given their ties to criminal activities and Chinese-backed operations catering to Chinese gamblers, what difficulty does Manila face in reducing reliance on these Chinese-linked economic activity while balancing its national security and diplomatic concerns?
So yeah, so this illegal gaming operations is not unique to the Philippines. So Chinese gambling interests have also expanded elsewhere in Southeast Asia, including in Cambodia, Myanmar, especially in areas that are outside the control of the central government, notably in the border regions, Thailand and Laos. Some areas also have this influx of gaming investments. So the Philippines last December have finally put an end into this enterprise. So it banned, put a blanket ban on all POGO operations. And so the onus of the security efforts, law enforcement efforts now in the Philippines is to make sure that the guerrilla, so-called guerrilla operations, those that did not accede or did not follow government's directive to stop these operations, but decided to insist, to operate continuously, but now illegal underground. And so the Philippines is, working with partners, trying to track, to make sure that the money trail for these operations and the local partners for these Chinese gaming enterprises will be held accountable. To some extent, the Philippines also work with China, information sharing, to try to arrest this, especially those fugitives from China that find their way in the Philippines and are somehow involved in the POGOs. And so there was some information sharing, some cooperation on the law enforcement side. But of course, the POGOs also affected the state of affairs between the Philippines and China because these POGOs, some of them are involved in criminal activities. They were also associated with alleged espionage. And so some in the security sector in the Philippines actually made it to one of the issues they raised to argue for the closure of the POGOs, that they are being used as vectors of influence, that they may corrupt local officials, and that they may be used as platforms to conduct intelligence work, spy work that may undermine Philippine security interests. So this trade was already put to a closure as of December. And so efforts now are trying to make sure, mopping up operations, making sure that there won't be any more illegal operations, whether underground or otherwise, that continue to exist. And so this is the focus now of the country's law enforcement efforts on this subject.
Thank you. It was very, it was a very cogent and informative, sir. Let us now little bit speak about the non-traditional security aspects. So to speak of non-traditional security, there are increasing cyber attacks on Manila, often linked to state-backed actors targeting government and critical infrastructure. How might these, along with China's misinformation campaigns, affect democratic process? Particularly, we had the Philippines midterm elections on May 12, 2025, and the Commission on Elections, the COMELEC website, and the Present Finder apps recorded over 3 million cyber attacks, which were aimed at seizing control of the systems and injecting malicious information. How do you look at it?
Well, yeah. So Philippines has a burgeoning digital economy. It has a very young demography, strong social media usage. So the use of social media is very open, and of course that is a gap that can be a loophole that may be exploited by unscrupulous interests, whether at home or abroad. And so this is where the Philippines' efforts to try to invest in modernizing, capacitating in cybersecurity is much needed. It is an imperative for the country's growing online commerce, and a lot of young people attuned to social media. So it's very important to make sure that this social media space, the cyberspace, will not be used to promote interests, narratives, especially spurious narratives, narratives that undermine the country's national security and foment confusion, so discord, and affect, the country's normal democratic processes, including its recent elections. And Philippines will be working with partners, comparing notes with other democracies that also suffer or, being subject of these kinds of cyber attacks. So the Philippines will be strengthening its cyber infrastructure. So investment in this field will mean training for necessary personnel. At the same time, welcoming support by other partners for creating necessary facilities to boost its digital infrastructure and provide ample security measures, for it. And on the other hand, on the issue of the cognitive warfare, the issue of the use of social media to promote certain narratives that affect the country's democracy, undermine the country's institutions. So this is where the country would have to work with other democracies, other like-minded allies, including countries like India, to be able to have conversations, share best practices, and share ways by which to identify these threats and look for ways to address these threats the soonest possible time.
My concluding question will be, Mr. Lucio. India is set to host the Quad Leaders Summit in the latter half of 2025, following the 2024 summit in Wilmington, Delaware. What will be Manila's key expectation, particularly regarding the Quad's focus on maritime security initiatives like Maitri and the Quad at Sea Ship Observer Mission? And how will you think these efforts will address Philippines' geopolitical challenges in the South China Sea and broader Indo-Pacific regional stability to speak of?
Well, certainly Manila would welcome the focus on maritime security given the Philippines' recent challenges on this front. And of course, the Quad is one of the configurations out there that continue to support, rules-based maritime order, international law, self-restraint, the non-use of force, coercion, or intimidation on flashpoints like the South China Sea. So Quad will allow the Philippines an opportunity, a platform by which to share its points, and at the same time get partners, able partners like Quad countries to support the Philippine position from the 2016 arbitration to, of course, the call for the rules-based order, and of course the pushback against efforts to undermine this order. And so India, being a democracy, a major maritime power, with its transition of its look east to act east policy, of course the expansion of its diplomatic horizons in not only in Southeast Asia but also well into the Pacific. And so this would provide a source of convergence between Delhi and Manila. And so the hosting of India of this upcoming Quad meeting will be something that Manila will be observing with much interest and the desire, the hope to engage leaders of Quad. And hopefully, whether in track 2 or track 1 levels or track 1.5, the engagement, in terms of security threat perceptions, risk assessment, and measures to address this, I think it's important to get more partners to share, their assessment of the evolving security landscape in the region, the best ways to deal with them, the best ways to address these problems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lucio. To summarize and capture the essence of our today's discussion, starting from the strong political will that is prevalent in China under President Xi Jinping, and speaking of the 2016 arbitration ruling and the Chinese narrative and rhetoric, which is steering a lot of turbulence in the South China Sea, coupled with Chinese advancements who are far ahead in science and technology. And of course, you have also enlightened us with your inputs on Philippines looking to minilaterals, the divergence of views within ASEAN in dealing with China, and how Philippines is diversifying its security cooperation, including Philippines' support for the Squad initiative, apart from the Quad. And it was also we heard from you about the how Philippines is going to be the rotating chair of ASEAN in the upcoming next meeting, and hopefully we all hope to have a roadmap and take a position on the code of conduct and to have enduring stability in the South China Sea. It is also interesting to note that you have a lot of young demography in Manila, and Philippines is also an emerging digital economy, which offers a lot of space for both India and Philippines to cooperate under the non-traditional security aspects. I think it is my privilege and time to thank you so much for taking time to be with us and share your first-hand inputs and insights. I'm sure all of our viewers have been enlightened, and they have been educated better on what are the security issues and dilemma facing Philippines. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A big thank you to our guest, Mr. Lucio, for graciously accepting our invitation and spending time to be with us and offering such invaluable insights. To our audience, I hope you found the discussion insightful and thought provoking. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed. Thank you so much, Mr. Lucio.
Thank you so much. Namaste. More power to your program.
Namaste, namaste. Thank you so much.